So it's been a really long time since I started recording these videos. You're probably going to see this before the Godzilla Monsterverse movies video and the video on some of my Nintendo games for like the first half of the year. And like the earliest of these videos were recorded all the way back in like April. And as for why I haven't gotten around to editing them yet, even though it's a pretty simple video to edit, or a couple of videos to edit, is just that I've either had plans, or even when I did have the day off like completely, often my parents would end up wanting to do something with me. And then I would just take up enough of my day that I didn't really have time to edit. And in the rare cases where I actually did have time, I kind of just didn't feel like it. I was often just burned out or something, especially after work. So yeah, that's why it's taken me so long to actually edit these videos, even though many of them were recorded a while ago. Yeah, I just want to give you that explanation before we start. Okay, enjoy whichever one of the two videos you're watching now. I feel like I can sum up my feelings on Godzilla 2014 pretty quickly compared to Showa, but we'll see how this goes. So in this movie, Godzilla is not the villain. He is in fact basically the hero again, like the later Showa films. But this is a new iteration of the character, obviously coming from a completely different studio now. And it takes place all over the globe, not just in Japan, but in America as well. And the main villain of this movie, or villains I should say, are the Mutas. Okay, I don't know why, but for some reason I repeatedly refer to the Mudos as Mutas. So I know they're called Mudos. I don't know why I did that. I'm sorry. Which are these weird creatures, not based necessarily on anything specific. They can like send out EMP attacks that knock out electricity, and so that adds an interesting flavor to their scenes and the scenes where they're fighting Godzilla, just in that they can pretty much immediately knock out all electric they can knock out all electric communication and capabilities of humans, basically making Godzilla kind of the only hope. They also feed on nuclear power, meaning they can literally eat bombs that the US tries to launch at them. And so the humans in this movie, kind of, mainly the military, are trying to defeat them, but but they repeatedly just kind of screw themselves, or humanity as a whole, over worse in their attacks. And so Godzilla ends up being, you know, the hero in a sense that can save us from the Mutas. And the human plot of this movie is okay. It's nothing to write home about. It starts out really interesting, but once it switches from kind of focusing on one character to another, that's when it kind of starts to go downhill a bit, or rather it's more like an instant jump and then a lower quality throughout the rest of the movie, which is still a decent enough movie, a decent enough plotline to keep you invested in the characters, but it's nothing where you are nearly as invested as in -1, and the characters aren't like super charming or anything like in some of the Showa movies. But it is at least interesting enough that you are rooting for the humans for the most part. You're not rooting for the military, you're rooting for the humans. Now, I think the biggest thing I have to give this movie props for is the destruction and how it showcases that. Now, of course, the Showa era films were 50 to 70 years old at this point, so those have the disadvantage of age, whereas this movie, this has, you know, high quality Hollywood special effects so Hollywood CGI too, so it can really show off the destruction these kaiju are causing. And you get a lot of scenes where it really shows off just how destructive the Mutas are, but also Godzilla too, even though he's a hero in this movie, you still see that just from being Godzilla, he does cause damage that definitely did not leave no one unharmed. And so the destruction in this movie is great simply because it has the benefit of being a newer movie that doesn't have to use miniatures. They can actually show the destruction in a realistic manner of these monsters. And it's hard to say where exactly to rank it. I'm tempted to put it, it's definitely in the Godzilla tier. I'm tempted to put it like at the top, but I don't want to fall in the trap of just putting it at the top because it's a newer movie and has better effects. I'm gonna tentatively put it below Hedorah, like just below Hedorah. I don't consider the Mutas to be as scary of villains as Hedorah, but I think because of this movie being newer, it is able to show off their destructive capabilities better than Hedorah was due to its age. Oh, and my other minor complaint about this movie is every time it feels like for the most of the movie, and not just the first half, but most of the movie, like every time Godzilla finally appears, like he's about to fight the Muta, and then it cuts away. And when you finally do get that Godzilla vs. Muta action, it's awesome. And the way he defeats both of them, especially the second one, is really sick. But I really wish we got to see more action scenes with Godzilla fighting the Mutas before the finale of the movie. I'm not going to bother ranking Kong Skull Island on my Godzilla tier list, but I will rank it respective to the Monsterverse as a whole. And it is not as good as Godzilla 2014. In fact, I'm kind of hoping it's my least favorite of these movies. We'll see, because so far I have not watched the other two or the one that just came out in theaters. I think the biggest thing is that, especially the beginning of this movie, has very Suicide Squad-esque editing. I'm referring to the first Suicide Squad movie, not the James Gunn one. Meaning, there are so many licensed songs over short montages in this movie, just over and over, especially at the beginning. Things get a bit better once Kong shows up, but even after that, there's still a couple of times where it's literally only 30 seconds of a licensed song in a montage, just because it feels like they couldn't figure out any other way to edit it. And that is annoying. But once Kong gets involved, things get better. I like John Reilly's character being this guy who has been trapped on Skull Island for 20 years, because it takes place in the 70s. Anyway, so yeah, he's an interesting character, and I do like both Kong and Godzilla in this universe are good guys, essentially. And so Kong does defend his territory from the military that is invading his home, so some innocent characters do die at the beginning, and that kind of creates the film's villain, Samuel L. Jackson, who is a military officer who immediately just hates Kong for killing his men, and wants to destroy Kong. And so that is an interesting dynamic. But then Kong, of course, is not doing this out of malice or anything, he's just trying to protect his home. And so, as the movie progresses, you obviously learn that Kong is not the bad guy. In fact, there are these things called skull crawlers that are the real villains of this movie that the heroes have to avoid, and eventually Kong has to defeat. I do like that in the end they have to save Kong. They actually have to stop the officer. I don't remember the guy's name already, his character's name, but they have to stop Samuel L. Jackson from killing Kong, or trying to, at the very least. And of course, you see that some of his men have to defect from him in order to prevent him from undergoing this plan. And another thing that's kind of just worth bringing up about this movie is, obviously in the old movies, Kong went to kidnap pretty women, and there are a few reasons I'm sure they don't want to bring that into this universe, especially with Kong being more of a heroic character in this film. They don't want to like make him a kidnapper, and so the way they kind of turn that into a character trait is he has this bond with Brie Larson's character, but the only way they really establish this bond is a brief scene where she touches Kong's nose, and that's about it. And it does come into play later, but they don't really like do much to establish the bond she has with Kong. So I kind of wish they spent more time establishing that, rather than just kind of having a single scene before the climax and then having it play an important role in the climax. I mean, this movie, it's alright. I liked aspects of it, some pretty funny lines as well in this, actually kind of a comedic movie at times. And I like Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson's characters, as well as John Riley's. I do like that. The villains eventually, they kind of get what's coming to them in classic kaiju movie fashion. And it is also cool just to see a movie where we're actually like on the monster's home turf instead of the monster invading a human city. But yeah, action is good, as I'm sure this entire franchise will excel at. But it's really just the editing that I find very strange in this movie that brings it down for me. If it were like edited more seriously, I guess, I might like it a bit more. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Kong Skull Island, and I'm going to watch Godzilla King of Monsters tomorrow. Okay, really quick, my friend did show me the animated Skull Island show on Netflix, and I did like it more than the Skull Island movie. I think having a show's length actually allowed them to flesh out Kong's character better than the movie, so that's why I'm ranking it above that. And if you want more elaboration, I don't know, ask me why in the comments. So in Godzilla King of the Monsters, the basic plot setup is that there's this orca device that can simulate monster calls, but a terrorist organization steals it and holds the main character's wife and daughter hostage. And so they have this device that can activate and enrage, basically control to a degree, any monsters. And obviously there's a lot you can do with that. But their goals, I will say, are kind of dumb. Now, Millie Bobby Brown character, I know this character gets a lot of hate online. I think she might be in the next movie as well, I'm not sure. But honestly, she's not like terrible. I think the only thing that I find weird about her is like there's kind of a plan that she's inferred to have gone along with, and she eventually turns against. But I don't really see, given her character, why she would go along with the plan at all in the first place. That's kind of weird. But yeah, the human plot overall is kind of stupid. I think Serizawa's cool, but the rest of the characters don't really matter to me. And I do not care. I do not care that the human plotline sucks in this movie. This could be the worst possible human plotline in all of Godzilla, and it still would not matter, because the kaiju action in this movie is so good. This is essentially a modern, not remake, but retelling of King Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. All of the main monsters in that movie are here. You get Rodan, Mothra, and of course Ghidorah. And it is everything, like the one thing that didn't really work for me about that movie is not present in this movie. If you didn't watch my Showa ranking, basically I didn't really like that Godzilla is kind of inferred to have like a human intelligence in that movie. He's kind of inferred to be having a conversation like the same way humans would. In this movie, he is an animal, as I like to see him, but he's still intelligent. You know, you have like an animal-like intelligence to Godzilla and to the other monsters as well, rather than just kind of making him a human in the shape of a giant lizard. And I think I just love every single usage of every monster in this movie. I wasn't sure how exactly they would do with Mothra, given that she's, you know, benevolent. She's not, she doesn't exist to be a threat. So I wasn't sure if they were going to turn her into a threat or how they were going to use her, but they do her justice. Rodan is really cool as kind of a temporary threat and kind of a sidekick to Ghidorah after Ghidorah proves itself as the alpha. But then Ghidorah itself is like, oh my god, it is so cool in this movie. There is not a scene with monster action in this movie that I do not like. Every single second a monster is on screen, it is perfection. I love how they even take Ghidorah's backstory of him being an alien and they actually like work that into the plot. Because in this movie, he is initially on Earth. They have to de-thaw him to get him involved in the plot. But as it turns out, that was a big mistake on the terrorist's part, because Ghidorah is not part of the natural order. Ghidorah is an alien and an invasive species, and therefore he really messes things up beyond what they expected. And that's just such a cool way to involve him. And every scene he is in, the action is immaculate. I have seen complaints that like they cut to humans too often in this movie, but for me, I feel like cutting to the humans, maybe the drama aspect isn't important to me, because yeah, the human plot is not that great, but like it really just shows the sheer scale and magnitude of these monsters and all of their destruction. Like, I already loved how much they showed the natural disaster-ish effects of these monsters in the first Godzilla movie, when it's just Godzilla vs. the Mutas. But now that we have like classic Godzilla villains, like really destructive monsters way beyond what the Mutas can do, it's so good. Like, the aftermath of every battle in this movie looks like an apocalypse, and it's awesome. You get the Mothra theme in this too, and the classic Godzilla theme, which I don't think was in 2014 at all. Both amazing. Yeah, man, I have genuinely been debating if I like this more than 54. Alright, in my original recording, I almost went too far and ranked King of the Monsters above Godzilla 54, which I know would make a lot of people mad. So the thing is, Godzilla 54 is definitely the better film artistically. King of the Monsters is really fun, but like 54 leaves you with something to think about, whereas King of the Monsters is just a fun movie. Really fun, but still, you know, not quite gonna make you think about the message like 54 will. So I am going to rank Godzilla King of the Monsters under 54, but I'm still ranking it as currently my second favorite Godzilla movie. I misspoke. I meant to say third favorite Godzilla movie. And in the same tier as 54. Like, yeah, maybe it's not technically as good of a movie, but I just love King of the Monsters so much that I want to show that it really to me, it really deserves that placement in the same tier as the original and -1. Now, on one hand, I do want to say that Godzilla vs. Kong has a lot to live up to, just because of how great the kaiju scenes were in this, and the fact that there are so many different kaiju. But on the other hand, my top 3 Showa films are obviously the original Godzilla, 54, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and King Kong vs. Godzilla. So this movie that I'm gonna watch soon has a lot going for it in terms of having kaiju that I am really excited to see in modern visuals. So I don't know if it's gonna beat King of the Monsters, but if it does, like, ooh. Okay, so it's been a couple nights since I watched Godzilla vs. Kong, of course the 2021 movie, and I did enjoy it, but I suppose I'll tell you right now, I think I'm going to put it in 3rd place of the 4 movies I've seen. So above Kong Skull Island, definitely a pretty sizable gap for me in entertainment value between Godzilla vs. Kong and Kong Skull Island, but then not quite as much as Godzilla 2014, and definitely not as much as King of the Monsters. Godzilla vs. Kong is going in a similar route to King of the Monsters, where it is mostly about the kaiju action, and humans, while they are important to the plot, they mainly exist just to give you a sense of scale for the kaiju action. But to me, I just think that King of the Monsters was more exciting and action-packed with its battles compared to Godzilla vs. Kong. You kind of have 2 different human plots here. One of them is about humans going to the Hollow Earth, trying to obtain an energy source, and so that's kind of where Kong comes into play, is they're trying to get Kong to lead them there. And the other is with Godzilla, who mysteriously attacks this facility in Florida. And then you have this conspiracy theorist who is trying to figure out why that's happening. And Millie Bobby Brown's character Maddie from the previous film brings along her friend Josh, who mainly exists in this movie just to give her a truck to drive, or a van to drive, I should say. And they kind of just invite themselves into that part of the plot, like they just decide they're part of it. So yeah, those are the 2 human plots, and neither of them really do much for me. I don't really care about any of these characters. Bernie is probably the most interesting one here. No, actually, I'm sorry. There's one human character I like. Gia, the kid that communicates with Kong. She, her whole connection with him is pretty cool, and how they can actually communicate through sign language. But then, like, her mom's not quite as interesting to me, and all the other humans are just kind of there. And yeah, Bernie's kind of interesting as a character to the plot, but again, Maddie kind of just invites herself to be part of the plot in this movie. It's funny because, like, so she's a listener of Bernie's podcast where he talks about infiltrating Apex Cybernetics. So Bernie's working at Apex Cybernetics, secretly a spy trying to figure out what they're plotting, and he's reporting what he finds on a podcast. And, you know, it's super secret. Nobody can know who he is. Nobody can find out his identity. But then Millie Bobby Brown, who's just a listener of his podcast, is able to, I mean, obviously, like, she knows the facility because I think there's only one in America. I think he must explicitly state it's in Florida or something that I don't know. Somehow she knows exactly where this dude is. And she goes to a convenience store knowing that he buys a lot of bleach because he showers with it. And they get his address by bribing Ronnie Chen $100. And the thing about that is, like, it's kind of funny how Maddie just kind of forces herself into the plot, But more importantly, like, that implies that this like super secret podcast he's doing could have been like exposed. They could figure out who this dude is at any time by going into this convenience store and just giving Ronnie Chin $100. Like, that's it. That's all they needed to do. Which means that maybe he probably wasn't that great at hiding his identity whatsoever. He doesn't use a voice modulator or anything like that. Like, they can recognize him instantly. So yeah, still a pretty stupid human plot, but you know, what matters most is the monster action. And that is where this film shines, but still, I think that's also why it isn't quite as good as King of the Monsters to me. Now again, King Kong gets involved in the plot because humans want to follow him to Hollow Earth to find an energy source and just study the Hollow Earth itself. But Godzilla is actually introduced in the very beginning of this movie. One thing I can't remember if I talked about when I talked about King of the Monsters or not is that Maddie's family, they have this grudge against Godzilla because it turns out when Godzilla fought the Mutos in 2014, it turns out that he had killed Maddie's brother. And I really like that detail because one of my biggest problems with some of the Showa films is when they kind of give Godzilla a human-like intelligence, he sort of just becomes a full-on hero, not a monster of destruction, and in order to make him at all destructive, they have to have an alien control him or something like that. So I like that in the Monsterverse. Godzilla, while he does save humans, he does defeat the monsters that would kill all life on Earth, or make it very, very difficult to live here, at least. He isn't like this super intelligent savior who is here to protect humans specifically. He's just here to defeat monsters that threaten his existence and other monsters like his existence. He is not going to hold back, and sometimes humans will die because of that. And I am glad to see that he isn't treated like, you know, just a full-on savior, that he still has this destructive tendency just because of what he is. And Godzilla vs. Kong continues that in an even better way, in that Godzilla senses a threat from this Apex Cybernetics company, and he attacks the Florida facility. And of course, a lot of innocent people who have nothing to do with Apex Cybernetics die in that attack. And what is cool about that is it shows that, you know, once again, it isn't just like random stragglers who get caught up in this that get hurt. It isn't just because Maddie's brother is the son of two Monarch employees that he was involved in the San Francisco battle that got him killed. No, if Godzilla senses a threat, he's going to take care of it. And any innocent civilians who are in the way, they're not gonna make it. He's not gonna distinguish between who the good humans are and who the bad ones are. No, if you're in the area where the threat is, you're going with the bad guys. So that's already a cool detail, and Godzilla and Kong's rivalry in this isn't based on any like big plot points or thing. They're just animals and they sense other apex predators. So once Kong is off Skull Island, he's in the wild, in not even in Godzilla's territory, just near it. Godzilla straight up comes for him. Godzilla is still an animal that is going to attack other apex predators that happen to be in the area, even if they aren't currently posing a threat. The film for me does drop off in quality a little bit with the Hollow Earth stuff. I mean, it's like it's just visual spectacle without too much action to keep it interesting. So for me, it's kind of like there's the scenes where Godzilla and Kong are on screen that are great, and then there are the scenes where it's mostly humans, and those are less interesting. So where the film picks up for me is in the final battle. which takes place in Hong Kong, and along with just being a pun on the fact that it's Kong versus Godzilla, it's also just a really cool location. You know, all of the city scape, the flashing lights, the neon aesthetic. It's a very cool setting for a kaiju battle. And now, spoiler alert for this movie. I did know going in that Mechagodzilla was going to be in this movie. I didn't know exactly how he would be involved, but I kind of figured that because of his involvement, the Godzilla vs. Kong battle would just end in them getting interrupted by Mechagodzilla. And so I expected it to be a cop-out, kind of like the original 1962 movie. I didn't expect there to be a winner. I kind of expected they'd be in the middle of fighting, and then Mechagodzilla shows up, and they both focus their efforts on him. But this movie actually gives us a proper fight with a proper ending between Kong and Godzilla before it switches to Mechagodzilla's interruption. That made me very happy to see that they didn't just cop out and you know, ignore the idea of one being stronger than the other. No, they let one of them win in this movie, and I am glad to see it. So Mechagodzilla, I do enjoy the fight, but I also think this is kind of what drags the movie down from being as good as King of the Monsters, because while Mechagodzilla is my favorite kaiju, this movie I don't really feel uses it enough. It's only on screen for the one battle, and that's fine. I don't mind Mechagodzilla being utilized in only a single battle, aside from one small scene in the mid-credits that doesn't even really count as a battle. It's basically just there to kill off a smaller monster to show Mechagodzilla's capabilities. But like, the Mechagodzilla battle only happening once in the movie is not a problem. I just don't really feel like it goes on for long enough, and I don't really feel like the full extent of Mechagodzilla's powers are utilized. Like, I think Mechagodzilla uses missiles once, and we never see Mechagodzilla fly. I don't mind the design. I know it's a kind of controversial design, but I think it looks pretty cool. And it is very cool getting to see King Kong fight Mechagodzilla, as well as how Godzilla and Kong fight together. But I just really wish that we got to see more of Mechagodzilla, because we're probably not going to revisit it at any point. We're probably not going to see Mechagodzilla as an antagonist again. I honestly wouldn't mind if we brought it back in a future movie, but I'm not expecting it. And so, given that this is the Monsterverse mecha, I feel like it was rather short-lived in terms of actually being a threat. Now, I said in my Monsterverse ranking it's going to be third. In my overall Godzilla ranking, it's kind of hard for me to choose. I think I'm going to have to reorder these tiers at this point, because like Megalon having its own tier for like ironically fun is it works for the Showa ranking, where it really does have to stand apart as its own thing from those other movies. But like, now that I'm getting to a point where I have to rank that alongside the good Godzilla movies, the ones I didn't enjoy quite as much as Megalon, I'm kind of realizing that I need to just kind of decide on a letter tier for Megalon, because I've been debating whether Megalon's ironic enjoyment is better or worse than Godzilla vs. Kong, which I do feel has unironic enjoyment. So I think I'm going to put it behind Mothra vs. Godzilla, obviously the one from the 60s, as I haven't gotten to any of the Heisei or Millennium era films yet. So Godzilla vs. Kong will go behind Mothra vs. Godzilla, and ahead of Godzilla vs. Megalon, because again, I do think I get genuine enjoyment out of Godzilla vs. Kong, whereas Megalon is all ironic enjoyment. But honestly, I do feel like it isn't in the same tier as Mothra vs. Godzilla. I would probably put it in a similar tier as Megalon. Not ironic enjoyment, just like in terms of how much I enjoy it. Because I do think my enjoyment of the movie is more towards the invasion of Astro Monster side of things than Monsterverse Godzilla, if that makes sense. Alright, I'm going to see Godzilla and Kong tomorrow in theaters, so I will see you probably not tomorrow night, but like the next night or so. It has been several weeks since I've gone to see Godzilla x Kong, the new Empire in theaters. At this point, I don't even know if it's still in theaters, so this probably can't be used as a review as to whether or not you should go see it. But if you want to know my thoughts, here they are. Starting off, I have a compliment. It sounds like a backhanded compliment to this movie, but I swear I mean it genuinely. The biggest piece of praise I can give this movie is the humans are the least important they have ever been to the plot. At least that's how it feels like to me, in regards to the Monsterverse movie specifically. Gia is the only one that really matters much. Trapper, who's a kaiju vet, a new character, he's somewhat important at the beginning and at the end. But then there's Gia's mom, whose name I don't even remember, and Bernie, the conspiracy theorist, and they don't matter to the plot at all. And a lot of people have complained about the humans in this movie, I know, like with many of the other Monsterverse movies. I certainly have with other Monsterverse movies. Here's my hot take. Even though the characters don't really matter that much, the human characters are not important to the plot, I actually feel like I genuinely enjoyed their plot line in this movie. So Gia and her mom, they're not gonna, make you cry or anything, but I feel like they provide just enough of, an emotional core to like keep you rooted and keep you with, some concern for the humans in this movie. Whereas Bernie and Trapper are like 100% just there for comedic effect. And there are moments where they certainly made me laugh. I think Trapper is my favorite Monsterverse character, human character at least, just because his role is so ridiculous. A kaiju vet, it's amazing. But like, other than a few scenes, the humans mainly exist in this movie to provide exposition. And again, that sounds like a negative, but it's actually a really good thing. And the reason why is because a lot of this movie's plot is told without words. And that's amazing. Like, often you'll see something happen and the humans will pop in just to put it into words to, exposit, what you just saw to make it clearer. But you can get a lot of the story if you cut every single human's line from this movie, I feel like. A lot of this movie makes perfect sense if you just look at the monster scenes. And that's exactly what I want to see from Monsterverse. I do think it's more of a Kong movie than a Godzilla movie. We're really following Kong for the plot. Again, it's a less human-focused movie compared to the rest of the Monsterverse. When I say you're following Kong for the plot, I don't mean like the humans are following Kong for the plot. I mean, you are watching Kong for probably a good majority of this movie, I think. He is looking for other Kongs, essentially, other of his species within Hollow Earth. He's lonely. Whereas Godzilla's plot in this movie is just that something's got him mad and he's just attacking other monsters on the surface to try and get as powerful as possible. When it comes to the villain in this movie, the Scar King, I wasn't really interested going into the movie with him. Mainly because he's just like a lanky monkey. I was worried it would go one of two directions. Either he wouldn't be at all interesting because it's just a monkey, where we already have Kong for that. Or two, they would try to make him more powerful than Kong, basically just make him way OP, so he's a threat for both Kong and Godzilla at the same time. And, you know, it's how is just a monkey going to do that? But they handled him in a way I like, where he doesn't really feel like he goes either of those routes. He's still interesting despite being, you know, just a monkey, but he also, you know, has more. He is a king, he has an army, and that's where he draws his power. I also really do love, you don't get much of it, but when Kong and Godzilla meet in this movie, I love their dynamic now, because Godzilla still has to be the apex predator. Godzilla still has to be the most powerful one. Whereas Kong at this point, especially after the last movie, is just so over that. He just does not care. And so when the two of them meet in this movie, it's very funny how they interact with each other. And I'm also just gonna say one thing in this movie really surprised me. One thing I did not think was gonna show up in the Monsterverse. I'm not gonna give you any more hints than that in case you haven't seen the movie, but if you have, I think you know what I'm talking about. You know how sometimes Marvel will like edit something out of the trailer so that it's a surprise when you go into the movie. It's not in the trailer shot, but it is in the actual movie shot. There is something like that in one of the trailers here, but that's all I'm saying. Godzilla vs. Kong. I meant to say Godzilla X Kong. It's just a very fun kaiju movie. The human characters are not important enough to detract from the film and add just enough value for them to serve their purpose well enough. And it's surprisingly good at visual storytelling. So I am actually going to consider this my favorite Godzilla and Kong film, above the original King Kong vs. Godzilla. In fact, it's going to go right above it in my ranking. As for why it's not above Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla from the Showa era, I don't know, it's just how I feel. I feel like after I watched King Kong vs. Godzilla from the Showa era, this movie is kind of what I imagined for a modern Kong and Godzilla movie, more so than Godzilla vs. Kong. That movie didn't quite give me what I was hoping for out of a Godzilla and Kong team up again, but this movie gave me exactly what I wanted, and I'm very glad for that. And now I have no idea where I'm going to go from here, because I've finished the Showa era that I'm gonna watch at least. And I have finished the Monsterverse, so, you know, do I go back and watch Heisei in order? Do I watch some Millennium out of order or in order? I'm gonna save Shin for the very last of my Godzilla watch list here. But yeah, other than that, I'm not sure where to go from here. So I guess next time you see me, who knows what I'll have watched.